I had always believed my marriage to be solid. On the surface, it looked perfect. He was successful, I was content, and we shared a life that others envied. But as the years passed, I felt something subtle, something I couldn't quite place, begin to unravel. My husband was no longer the man I married. The spark between us had dimmed. At first, I thought it was just a phase, a temporary lull in our otherwise smooth relationship. But it kept lingering. We weren't fighting. That wasn't the issue. It was the silence, the absence of connection. It felt like we were simply two people sharing the same space, rather than partners in life. I began to notice how little he truly noticed me. He came home late from work, rarely checking in, and when we did talk, it was about trivial things, what needed to be done around the house, or some small detail about his workday. It wasn't the deep conversations we once had, or the long evenings spent laughing together. The emotional intimacy was gone, and physical intimacy had become a rare occurrence, almost mechanical when it did happen. I tried to talk to him about how I felt, but it always seemed to fall flat. His responses were lukewarm at best, and it felt like he wasn't really listening. His eyes would wander, his mind elsewhere, and I'd feel more alone than I ever had before. It wasn't that I didn't love him anymore. It was more that I didn't feel loved by him. The affection I once had for him was still there, but it was buried under layers of frustration and disappointment. I kept hoping that things would improve, but they never did. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, and the idea of spending another year, or 5, in this stagnant, unsatisfying marriage was unbearable. I needed something to change. That's when I met him. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking for it. He was someone who saw me, really saw me, when no one else did. He was attentive, kind, and genuinely interested in who I was, not just the version of me that had become invisible in my own home. We started talking, just casual conversations at first. It was easy. His attention was refreshing, like a breath of fresh air after being suffocated for so long. He listened without distractions, and when he spoke, he made me feel important, valued. It was a stark contrast to the indifference I was receiving at home. At first, I told myself it was harmless. Just a fleeting escape from the monotony of my life. A temporary reprieve from the emotional void I felt at home. But as the days went by, those conversations became more frequent, more personal. I began to crave them, to look forward to the moments when we'd talk. The attention he gave me made me feel seen, desired, in a way I hadn't in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt special. I told myself it was just a phase. I wasn't doing anything wrong, I justified. But deep down, I knew I was playing with fire. I could feel myself getting pulled deeper into a situation that was already on the brink of becoming something more. He made me feel something I hadn't in so long, important, alive, noticed. In my marriage, I had become an afterthought, a placeholder in my own life. With him, I was a priority. It was intoxicating, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was the connection I had been longing for. Yet every time I thought about what I was doing, guilt crept in. I loved my husband, at least I thought I did. But the idea of staying in a marriage that had slowly suffocated me was unbearable. And as the days went on, I couldn't ignore the growing attraction between me and the other man. I never expected it to go this far, but I also couldn't deny that a part of me wanted it to. I wanted more. I wanted to feel alive again. I had convinced myself that this was just a momentary escape, but the truth was, I was on the edge of something I could never take back. And once I crossed that line, there was no going back. The first time I crossed the line, I felt a rush of guilt followed by an overwhelming sense of relief. It was almost as if I had been holding my breath for years and finally, I could exhale. We were together, finally, and the connection between us felt electric, raw, and real. The touch of his hand sent shivers through my body, and the way he looked at me made me feel like I was the only person in the world. It was something I hadn't experienced in so long. The need for affection, the desire to feel wanted, it all came rushing back. But as the night went on, so did the realization that I had just made a choice that could change everything. I felt the weight of my betrayal settling in, but it was masked by a rush of adrenaline. I told myself it was just this once, that I was only satisfying a need that had been ignored for too long. That was how I justified it. That was how I made sense of it all. The days following felt like I was walking a tightrope. I couldn't tell anyone what had happened. The secrecy, the lies, it weighed on me. But when I saw him again, all those doubts faded into the background. The connection was undeniable, and it didn't just stop at physical attraction. We talked, laughed, shared things about ourselves I hadn't even shared with my husband in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was seen. I was understood. The conversation started to drift from casual to deeply personal. We talked about everything, our fears, our dreams, our regrets. There was a sense of freedom with him that I hadn't felt in years. Every moment we spent together felt like a fleeting escape from the monotony of my life, but it also felt like something deeper. I didn't just want him physically anymore, I wanted him emotionally. I had begun to care for him, to think about him when I wasn't with him. His messages, his smile, his touch, they were becoming the highlight of my day. And yet, every time we were together, I felt that deep, gnawing guilt. I had never imagined myself as someone who would cheat. I had always prided myself on being honest and loyal, but now I was living a double life. My husband, at home, was none the wiser. I still cooked his meals, kept the house in order, and smiled when he came home. But inside, I was breaking apart. The more I allowed myself to be drawn into this affair, the more it became clear that it wasn't just about the excitement or the physical connection. It was about something that was missing from my marriage, something I had been starving for. Emotional intimacy, attention, affection. My husband, though not malicious, had become a stranger. The man who had once been my everything seemed like a distant memory. Still, the guilt gnawed at me, and I started to question if what I was doing was worth it. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything I had been suppressing in my marriage. Was I running away from my problems? Or was this affair the result of years of unmet needs and desires? I tried to convince myself that it wasn't just the affair that was wrong, but my entire relationship with my husband. We had drifted so far apart that I didn't even recognize us anymore. I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. Every time I saw him, the spark between us ignited again, stronger than before. I couldn't help it. I didn't want to hurt my husband, but I was falling for someone else, and it terrified me. I didn't know what to do with these feelings, how to reconcile the love I still felt for my husband with the new, thrilling emotions that were stirring within me. What started as an escape was now a deep entanglement. I couldn't look at my husband without feeling touched. The day he found out felt like the world had come crashing down. I never expected him to catch me, but somehow he did. His face when he confronted me, there was no hiding the anger, the hurt, the disbelief. The words came out in a rush, jumbled, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. "How could you?" he asked, voice shaking. I wanted to explain, to apologize, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? I tried to deny it at first, but the guilt was written all over my face. I could see it in his eyes, the raw pain of betrayal. He wasn't shouting, but there was a quiet devastation in his tone that cut deeper than any argument could have. I could feel the walls closing in on me. I had to face the truth, the choice I had made, and now there was no way to take it back. The trust we had built over the years was shattered in an instant, and I was the one who had shattered it. We didn't speak much after that. The silence in the house was deafening. It felt like we were two strangers, no longer sharing the same space, just existing in it. I wanted to explain myself, to tell him how I had felt so alone, so neglected, but the words wouldn't come. I had been caught in a lie so big, so unforgivable, that I couldn't find a way to make it right. The man I loved was standing in front of me, crushed by the weight of my actions, and I had no way to fix it. I watched him over the next few days, as he tried to process what had happened. He didn't look at me the same way anymore. The warmth, the affection, everything was gone. The love I once felt from him had turned cold, and now it was my turn to feel what it was like to be abandoned. I didn't just lose the trust of my husband, I had lost the future we had built together. He didn't know if he could ever forgive me, and truthfully, I wasn't sure I could forgive myself. I had always believed that love could conquer anything, that communication and effort could heal all wounds. But this felt different. How could we ever come back from something like this? How could I expect him to believe in me again, to trust me after I had betrayed him so completely? The affair wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of everything that had gone wrong between us. My dissatisfaction, my loneliness, my need for someone to see me for who I was. In the days that followed, the guilt suffocated me. I couldn't look at him without seeing the hurt in his eyes. Every word I spoke felt hollow. I wanted to apologize, to fix everything, but how could I? The damage had been done. The affair had not only affected my marriage, it had shattered me as well. I was left with nothing but the consequences of my actions. The weight of my betrayal was too heavy to carry, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing him forever. But even as I faced the wreckage I had created, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were before. I couldn't undo the affair, no matter how much I wished I could. The connection I had with the other man had awakened something inside me, something I couldn't ignore. But I couldn't stay with him either. I couldn't ignore the damage I had caused to my marriage, to the life I had built with my husband. There was no easy way out. I had to face the reality of what I had done. And as I looked at my husband, I realized that the path forward would never be simple. The trust we had once had was gone, and I couldn't blame him for not knowing if he could ever rebuild it. I didn't know if I could ever rebuild it either. The affair had torn us apart, and now all that was left was the painful question of whether we could ever come back from it. I spent the next few weeks in a haze, my mind consumed by the fallout from the affair. I had hurt my husband in ways I couldn't undo, and the guilt gnawed at me every day. The silence between us was deafening, but the truth was, I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't sure if I wanted to salvage the marriage, or if I was too far gone. I couldn't change the past, but I had to make a decision about what came next. The affair had forced me to confront the reality of my own unhappiness, but it also gave me the clarity I needed to understand that I could no longer live in a state of emotional limbo. I spent long hours thinking about what I wanted, what I needed. The connection I had with the other man was intense, but it wasn't enough to erase the life I had built with my husband. The affair had shown me that I needed more than just physical affection. I needed someone who truly saw me, who understood me. But I also knew that seeking that outside of my marriage had been a mistake. I had betrayed the person who loved me, and that was something I couldn't take back. At first, I thought about leaving, about starting over. The idea of walking away from my marriage seemed like an easy escape, but it wasn't the answer. I had made a promise when I married my husband, and despite everything, I wasn't ready to throw it all away. The pain of betrayal was immense, but the pain of regret was even worse. I knew I had to confront the consequences of my actions and find a way to move forward, whether that meant working on our marriage or going our separate ways. We started to talk, slowly at first. He was hesitant, angry, and understandably, not sure if he could ever trust me again. I didn't blame him. I couldn't ask him to forgive me overnight, and I didn't expect him to. But we began to acknowledge what had happened, and that in itself was a start. The road to rebuilding trust was going to be long, and it would require effort from both of us. It wasn't just about saying the right things or making promises, it was about proving, through actions, that we were both willing to fight for our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were nights when we barely spoke, when the weight of the betrayal hung over us like a shadow. But there were moments, small ones, where we connected again, where the intimacy that had been lost started to resurface. We went to counseling, not to fix everything at once, but to understand what had broken down between us. I wasn't expecting miracles, but I was willing to put in the work. I wanted to see if we could rebuild, not for the sake of saving face or holding on to the past, but because, somewhere deep down, I still believed in us. At the same time, I had to reckon with my own need for self-discovery. The affair had woken something inside me, something I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about the physical aspect of the relationship. It was about who I had become, what I had lost along the way. I had allowed myself to become numb, to accept a life of quiet dissatisfaction. Now, I needed to reclaim myself, not just for my husband, but for me. I began to make changes in my own life, taking care of myself, rediscovering passions and desires that had been pushed aside for too long. In the end, the affair had been a wake-up call. It was a painful reminder that neglecting my own needs had consequences. But it also showed me that I could evolve, that I could make choices that would shape my future. I wasn't the same person I was before all of this. I had learned, painfully, that true connection, whether in a marriage or outside of it, requires honesty, communication, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Whatever happened between me and my husband from here on out, I knew I had to move forward with clarity and strength. The road would be difficult, filled with bumps and setbacks, but it was also a path toward healing.